Officer, it sounds like you messed up your own order and decided to make that girl miserable for it.
Vivian said calmly.
Ha! You people always have something to say.
He scoffed.
Mind your business before I make it my business, lady.
I'm not going to sit here and pretend I didn't see anything, officer.
She replied.
You want to defend that little waitress so bad?
Darwin's eyes went cold. He upended the full can directly over her head. Cold liquid cascaded over her head and her open case files.
Oops, my hand slipped.
He threw his head back, laughing. What Officer Darwin Perkinson didn't know was that he had just poured a drink on the new district attorney of Harlan County, and the consequences were already standing up. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The coffee was perfect. Vivian Monroe wrapped both hands around the mug and let the warmth settle into her palms. Outside the window, Harlan County, Georgia moved through its Tuesday morning like it had no idea anything was about to change. Cars rolling slow down Clement Street. A man walking his dog past the barber shop. A kid on a bicycle. No helmet, no particular destination. Ordinary. Quiet. She had earned this quiet. Fuller's Family Diner smelled the way it always did. Bacon grease and fresh biscuits, and the particular sweetness of syrup that had been warming on a griddle since 6 in the morning. The red vinyl booths were worn soft at the edges. The counter stools wobbled on the same loose bolts they'd wobbled on for 15 years. The ceiling fan above the register turned slow, pushing the warm air around without much conviction. Vivian had been coming here every Tuesday for 4 years. Same booth, same window, same order, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. It was her ritual. The Tuesday before any big change in her life, she came here, sat down, and thought it all the way through. Today, she had a lot to think about. 4 days ago, she had stood in the Harlan County Courthouse in her best black suit and raised her right hand and been sworn in as district attorney, the youngest in the county's history, the first black woman to hold the office. At 38 years old, 14 years she had spent building toward that moment. Public defender, federal prosecutor, civil rights litigator. 14 years of courtrooms and late nights and cases that broke her heart and cases that put it back together. 14 years of people telling her she was too young, too aggressive, too much. 14 years of her mother telling her she wasn't nearly enough of any of those things. Her mother was usually right. She had a folder open in front of her, case briefings she had brought from home, notes in her own handwriting crowding the margins. Her first official day was tomorrow. Today was still hers. One last morning of anonymity, of being just a woman eating breakfast by the window before the county learned her name and everything that came with it. She turned a page. Behind the counter, Denise Fuller moved with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had run this place for 31 years and knew every inch of it by heart. She was 67 years old, with silver-streaked locks pulled back neat, and she carried herself like someone who had survived things she never talked about and been made stronger by all of them. She refilled the sugar dispensers. She checked the coffee station. Her hands were steady and sure. Then she glanced toward the parking lot window. Her hands slowed. A black and white patrol car was pulling into the lot. She recognized it the same way you recognize weather, not by thinking about it, just by the feeling that moves through you when you see the clouds coming in. Her jaw tightened. Just barely. Just enough. She set the sugar dispenser down. Vivian didn't notice. She was reading about a property dispute case she'd inherited from the previous DA, making a small note in the margin, thinking about how she would approach it differently. The diner was warm. The coffee was good. The ceiling fan turned slow overhead. She was, in that moment, completely at peace. That was the last time she would feel that way for a very long time. The door swung open hard, not knocked open, not pushed. Swung, the way men push through doors when they want the room to know they've arrived. The little bell above the frame rang out sharp, and the sound of boots on linoleum followed, heavy and unhurried, the kind of footsteps that expected everything in the room to rearrange itself accordingly. Officer Darwin Perkinson filled the entrance. He was 42 years old, and built like a man who had never once been told to make himself smaller. Broad through the shoulders, red through the face. The kind of jaw that stayed set even when he was laughing, which he was doing now. A loud, open-mouthed laugh at something one of the officers behind him had said. He wore his uniform like a costume he had never taken off. His badge caught the light over the door. Behind him, Officer Stacy Bowman, 32, smiling at whatever he'd said. Officer Kevin Dunn, 29, already laughing before the joke was finished, because that was simply how things worked when you were around Perkinson. The door swung shut. Vivian turned a page. Perkinson took the center stool at the counter like it had been saved for him. It probably had been. Vivian got the sense, from the way Denise moved to the far end of the counter, from the way the two other patrons near the middle shifted almost imperceptibly in their seats, that this was how it always went on Tuesdays. The room rearranged itself around Darwin Perkinson the same way water moves around a rock, automatically, without choice. Bowman and Dunn took the stools on either side of him. Dunn spun his once like a kid and grinned. Perkinson planted both elbows on the counter and looked around the diner with the slow, satisfied expression of a man surveying something he owned. His eyes moved across the booths. They landed on Vivian for just a moment. A black woman alone, papers spread across a four-top, not looking up, and then moved on. She was scenery. She was furniture. She was nothing that required his attention. Not yet. Vivian turned another page. Cassie Burns came through the kitchen door carrying the plates. She was 19 years old and slight in the way of someone still growing into herself. Her apron was tied neat, order pad tucked in the front pocket, dark hair back in a ponytail that had been perfect at 7 in the morning and was coming loose 3 hours later. 3 weeks into her first job, still learning which regulars liked which booths, how Denise liked her coffee station stocked, how to carry 2 plates without letting them tilt. She had taken Perkinson's order herself 20 minutes ago, written it down word for word, over easy. Wheat toast, orange juice, no ice. She had read it back to him. He had nodded. She set the plate in front of him carefully. The eggs were perfect. Yolks intact, whites set clean, exactly the way he had asked. She set the juice down beside it. Full glass, no ice, just like he'd said. Perkinson looked at the plate. He picked up his fork, and with one slow, deliberate movement, almost lazy, like a man with nothing but time, he pressed the flat of the fork down directly onto both yolks. Hard. The yellow burst open and spread wide across the whites, pooling at the edges of the toast. He did it without looking away from the counter. Then he turned to Dunn and said something low, and Dunn laughed. Cassie stood there. She had watched him do it. She had watched him break them himself, with his own hand, and she stood very still trying to understand what was happening and why. Then Perkinson turned to look at her, and his expression had changed completely. The casual look was gone. In its place was something hard and ready, the look of a man who had already decided how this was going to go. He picked the plate up with 2 fingers, held it toward her like evidence. "What did I ask for?" Cassie blinked. "Over easy, sir. Over easy. Right. So what is this?" He tilted the plate slightly. The broken yolks slid. "You see any over easy here? Because I don't." I see a mess. Sir, I watched you. You watched me what? His voice dropped, smooth and sharp at the same time, like a blade wrapped in cloth. You watched yourself do your job wrong? That what you watched? Cassie's mouth opened and closed. I ordered over easy. He said it slowly, separately, each word its own sentence. Over. EAC. You got that written down somewhere on that little pad of yours? Or is reading also a problem? Dunn snorted. Bowman looked at the counter but didn't speak. I'm sorry, Cassie started. I can take it back and… You're sorry. Perkinson leaned back on the stool and smiled at Dunn like they were sharing a private joke, then looked back at her. That's great. That's real helpful. You know what sorry gets me? Cold eggs and a wasted lunch break. He pushed the plate forward on the counter toward her, not handing it back, pushing it. This is what happens when they put somebody up front who can't handle a simple order. I tell you what I want. You write it down. And somehow it still comes out wrong. Every single time. Cassie's hand reached for the plate. It was shaking. Visibly, undeniably shaking. She was trying to steady it, and she couldn't. And Perkinson's eyes went straight to it. And something moved in his expression then. Not regret, satisfaction. The quiet, ugly satisfaction of a man who had found the reaction he came looking for. Take it back, he said flatly. And maybe this time, try paying attention. Cassie's face had gone completely white. She picked up the plate without another word, jaw tight, eyes down, the way a person looks when they are fighting very hard not to cry in front of someone who would enjoy it. Denise was already moving from the far end of the counter, 15 feet away. That tight, careful expression on her face. The look of a woman who had seen this exact performance before and was trying to get there before it finished. She was not fast enough. She heard your order correctly the first time. The voice came from the window booth. Calm, clear, unhurried, carrying across the diner the way a voice carries when it has spent years being heard in rooms that didn't want to hear it. She made exactly what you asked for, and you know it. Every sound in the diner stopped. The couple near the door stopped talking. The cook went quiet behind the service window. The ceiling fan turned overhead, and the soft, steady tick of it was suddenly the loudest thing in the room. Perkinson turned slowly on his stool. Vivian Monroe was looking directly at him over the top of her case files. She had not raised her voice. She had not moved from her seat. She was simply looking at him, steady, level, completely unbothered. And the total absence of fear on her face hit him somewhere he wasn't expecting. His smile disappeared. For the first time in longer than he could probably remember, Darwin Perkinson had nothing ready to say. He just stared at her, and she looked straight back, calm as still water, and twice as deep, and did not look away. The stool scraped against the linoleum as Perkinson stood up. He didn't rush. That was the thing. He moved like a man who had never once had a reason to hurry, because nothing had ever gotten away from him before. He picked up his soda can from the counter, turned it once in his hand, and then he walked toward Vivian's booth with that loose, easy stride. 4 steps, unhurried, the way a man walks when he is absolutely certain the room belongs to him. Bowman and Dunn had gone quiet behind him. The couple near the door had gone quiet. Everyone had gone quiet. Perkinson stopped at the edge of Vivian's table. He looked down at her the way men like him looked at things they had already decided weren't worth their full attention. Her case files, her coffee mug, her gold earrings, her blue dress. He took his time with it, like he was doing an inspection and finding everything slightly beneath standard. Then he smiled. Not a real smile. The kind that lived only on the outside of a face. You got something to say to me? Vivian looked up at him, directly. No hesitation, No flicker of anything he could use. I already said it. Yeah. He nodded slowly, like he was considering that. Yeah, you did. He glanced back at Dunn, who was watching from the counter with wide, uncertain eyes. Then he looked back at Vivian. See, the thing is, I don't know you. You don't eat here on Tuesdays. I'd remember. His voice had dropped into something conversational and easy, which somehow made it worse. So, I'm going to need you to mind your business. How's that sound? It sounds like you broke your own eggs, Vivian said, and decided to make that girl's morning miserable for it. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend I didn't see that. Something shifted behind his eyes. It wasn't embarrassment. Men like Perkinson didn't embarrass easily, especially not in public, especially not in front of their people. What shifted was something uglier. The cold, calculating recalibration of a man who had just been called out cleanly and was now deciding what it was going to cost her. The two of them held the moment. Then Perkinson exhaled, long and slow. He rolled his neck once, like a man releasing tension he had decided wasn't worth carrying. His shoulders dropped. His grip on the soda can loosened. He even let out a short, quiet sound. Not quite a laugh, but something adjacent to it. The sound of a man standing down. All right, he said. Just that. All right. Like he was done with it. He turned away from her table. One step back toward the counter. Then another. Denise's shoulders dropped half an inch behind the register. The couple near the door exchanged a quiet glance of relief. Dunn reached for his coffee. Even the air in the room seemed to shift. The awful, stretched tightness of the last 30 seconds beginning to loosen. Just slightly. Just enough. Cassie let out a breath she had been holding since Vivian first spoke. Vivian looked back down at her case files. She reached for her coffee mug, settled back against the booth. She turned the page. Perkinson stopped. He stood with his back to her for just a moment. One beat, two, and then he looked down at the soda can still in his hand. And something crossed his face that nobody in the diner could quite see from where they were sitting. Something private. Something that had already made its decision. He turned back around. He walked to her table a second time, slower than before, more relaxed, almost friendly. Like a man coming back to finish a conversation he had forgotten to close properly. Vivian looked up. He smiled at her. Wider this time. Easier. You know what, he said pleasantly. You're right. And he upended the entire soda can directly over her head. The sound it made was obscene. That sharp, cold crack of carbonation hitting her hair all at once. The ice cold flooding down through her curls, rushing behind her ears, trailing down the back of her neck in thin, freezing lines. The soda soaked into her shoulders, spread dark and fast across the front of her blue dress, dripped from the edge of the table onto her lap. The open case files in front of her. Notes in her own handwriting, careful margin marks, 14 years of practiced preparation, were soaked through in seconds. The ink began to bleed immediately. Oops, my hand slipped. You know, accidents happen, he said. Then he laughed, full and open and completely unbothered. The laugh of a man who had just done exactly what he planned to do from the moment he stood up off that stool. Dunn laughed too, sharp, reflexive, a half-second behind, the way a person laughs when they're more afraid not to than they are willing to join in. Bowman made a sound and cut it off, fast, staring hard at the counter. Across the diner, a woman in her 60s reached quietly for her phone and began to record. Cassie Burns stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, still holding the plate. Her face had moved through white and arrived somewhere beyond it. A hollow, stricken expression. The face of someone who understood with perfect, terrible clarity that the woman in the blue dress had defended her, and that this cold and deliberate humiliation, was the price that had been charged for it. Denise Fuller stood rigid behind the counter, both hands flat on the surface, jaw set so tight it looked like something that might break. And Vivian Monroe did not move. She did not gasp. She did not shove back from the table. She did not give him the wide, shattered look he had engineered this whole moment to produce. The look that would tell him and everyone watching that she had been put back in her place. She sat completely still. Slowly, she reached for a napkin, pressed it to her face, blotted her forehead, her cheekbones, the line of her jaw. She blotted her earrings, gold hoops her mother had pressed into her hands the morning of her swearing in. One at a time, careful, unhurried. She set the napkin down. Then she looked up at Darwin Perkinson, not with tears, not with rage, with something far steadier and far more dangerous than either, the clear, level gaze of a woman who had been living inside this exact dynamic her entire life, who had spent 14 years turning that experience into something sharp and precise and completely unstoppable. She looked at him like she already knew exactly what came next. Because she did. The laugh was still dying in Perkinson's throat when the corner booth moved. Nobody had been paying attention to the corner booth. Nobody ever paid much attention to the corner booth. It was the kind of spot where a person could sit with a cup of coffee and a newspaper and simply exist without drawing anything toward them. Jerome Walter had been doing exactly that for the better part of an hour. Quiet, still, watching. He wasn't quiet anymore. He came out of that booth with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who had made a decision and was completely at peace with it. No rush, no noise. He set his napkin on the table, pushed his coffee cup aside, and stood to his full height. 54 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of bearing that came from 2 decades in courtrooms, where being the only black man in the room was just Tuesday. He walked directly to Perkinson. Not around him, not beside him, directly to him, stopping close enough that Perkinson had to look at him, had to actually register that a man was standing in front of him and was not moving. "Do you have any idea?" Jerome said, loud and clear, loud enough for every single person in that diner to hear every single word. "Who you just did that to?" Perkinson looked at him. Something flickered across his face. A brief, instinctive recalculation. Then the smirk came back, because the smirk was his armor, and he had been wearing it so long he put it on without thinking. "Some woman eating breakfast," he said. Jerome looked at him for a long moment. Didn't blink, didn't flinch. Just looked at him with the patient, measuring expression of a man who had heard worse from better people and was entirely unmoved by all of it. Then he turned to face the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried to every corner, every booth, every stool at the counter, "I'd like you to meet Vivian Monroe." He paused, just one beat, just long enough for the name to land. She was sworn in as District Attorney of Harlan County, Georgia, 4 days ago. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Vivian had ever heard. It wasn't the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of a room full of people who had all just understood something at the exact same moment. The couple near the door. The cook visible through the service window, a spatula going still in his hand. The woman with her phone, who had been recording for nearly 2 minutes and had not lowered it once. Perkinson's smirk was gone. Not faded. Gone. Wiped clean off his face like something erased. He turned back to Vivian. Really turned. Really looked. And whatever he saw sitting across from him in that soda-soaked blue dress was not what he had seen 30 seconds ago. The calculation behind his eyes was running fast now, almost visibly, like a machine that had just been given a problem it wasn't built to solve. Officer Dunn had gone absolutely still on his stool. Officer Bowman was staring at the counter with the fixed, deliberate attention of someone who had decided the safest place in the room was anywhere but here. It was an accident. Perkinson's voice came out different now. Less music in it. I didn't mean... My hand slipped. It was an accident. Your hand slipped, Jerome repeated. He didn't say it angrily. He didn't need to. He just set it back, flat and clean, and let it sit in the air where everyone could look at it. Denise had already come around the counter with a stack of clean towels. She moved to Vivian's booth without a word, setting them gently on the table, her hand briefly touching Vivian's shoulder. A quiet, solid thing. The touch of a woman who understood exactly what had just happened in her diner, and was sorry it had taken this long to have someone in the room who could do something about it. Jerome sat back down in the corner booth. He already had his phone to his ear. Perkinson was still standing at the edge of Vivian's table. The certainty was draining out of him in real time. Not all at once, but steadily, the way air leaves something that has been punctured. He opened his mouth once more, closed it, and looked at Dunn, who looked immediately away. Vivian stood. She didn't hurry. She gathered her soaked case files one by one, stacked them carefully, and tucked them under her arm. She picked up her coffee mug, took one last sip, cold by now, but she drank it anyway, and set it back on the table. She walked toward the restroom. On the way, she passed Cassie Burns, who was still standing in the kitchen doorway with the plate in her hands, her face a map of guilt and shock and something close to devastation. "I'm sorry," Cassie whispered. "This happened because of me. Because of the eggs. Because I—" Vivian stopped. She turned to face her fully. Not quickly. Not with impatience. Fully. The way you turn toward something that deserves your complete attention. "This did not happen because of you," she said. Quiet. Direct. Certain in the way that only true things are certain. "It happened because of him. Do you understand the difference?" Cassie looked at her. Her eyes were wet at the corners. She nodded. Slowly at first, then more firmly, like something was solidifying inside her that hadn't been solid before. Vivian held her gaze one moment longer. Then she turned and walked to the restroom. Behind her, Darwin Perkinson stood exactly where she had left him, still at the edge of her booth, the empty soda can loose in his hand, the certainty gone from his face, and nothing yet arrived to replace it. Vivian heard the new voice before she pushed the restroom door open. It was the kind of voice that arrived ahead of the person using it. Deep, measured, warm in the deliberate way of a man who had spent decades perfecting the sound of being reasonable. She didn't know the voice yet, but she recognized the type immediately. She had sat across from that voice in conference rooms and courtrooms her entire career. She knew exactly what it was built to do. She took her time. She stood at the restroom sink and ran cold water over her wrists, the way her mother had taught her. When everything gets too hot, cool the pulse points first. She looked at herself in the mirror. Soda drying in her curls. Her blue dress darker across both shoulders than it should have been. Her earrings still perfect, still holding. She dried her hands. She straightened her back. Then she walked out. Captain Roy Berman was already everywhere. That was the only way to describe it. He was a heavy-set man of 58 with silver hair cut close and the kind of easy smile that had been doing heavy lifting for 30 years. He wasn't in uniform. He'd come in plain clothes, which meant he hadn't been dispatched. He had come because someone had called him. He moved through the diner like he owned the floor plan, one hand on Jerome Walter's shoulder, murmuring something low that made Jerome's jaw tighten. Then turning to Officer Bowman, 2 quiet words, and Bowman's hand moved immediately to her jacket pocket, and stayed there. The phone was away. Whatever she'd been holding was gone. Then Berman crossed to Pammy Owen, the woman with the phone near the window. He sat down across from her, uninvited, and smiled. Vivian couldn't hear what he said from where she stood, but she watched Pammy's expression move from alertness to uncertainty, to something small and withdrawn. Pammy's phone went into her purse. Vivian stood in the restroom doorway and watched the room being unmade. 30 seconds ago, this diner had been a room full of witnesses. Now, it was becoming something quieter, something more manageable. One conversation at a time, one gentle suggestion at a time. The shape of what had happened here was being carefully, professionally softened. Berman turned and saw her. He crossed the room with his hand already extended, smile already in place. Warm, open, giving absolutely nothing away. Ms. Monroe. He shook her hand firmly. Roy Berman. I'm captain with the sheriff's department. I want to start by saying I'm deeply sorry about what happened here today. Deeply sorry. That kind of behavior is not what this department stands for. And I want you to know that Officer Perkinson will absolutely be spoken to. He said it all perfectly. Every word in exactly the right place. Vivian looked at him. Thank you, Captain. These things... He paused, shook his head like a man genuinely pained. They should not happen. And I take full responsibility for making sure there are consequences. He clasped his hands together. Earnest, concerned. I hope this doesn't color your first week in office. Lord knows you've got enough on your plate. He knew exactly how long she'd been in office. He knew it, down to the day. I appreciate that, Vivian said. I'll need a full copy of Officer Perkinson's complaint history. All of it. Something moved behind his eyes. Fast. Nearly invisible. The smile stayed exactly where it was. Of course, he said. I'll have my office look into getting that together for you. Then he leaned in, fractionally, just enough, and lowered his voice to the register of a man sharing friendly advice between colleagues. Ms. Monroe, you're new here. I understand that, and I want you to succeed. I genuinely do. But I've been in this county 31 years. He let that number sit for just a moment. I've seen a lot of people come in wanting to change things fast, and the ones who do best, the ones who really last, they take their time. They build relationships. They understand how things work before they start pulling at them. He smiled again. Warm, patient, absolute. I hope your time here is long and peaceful. I really do. It wasn't a threat. It was delivered with a smile and a handshake, and the comfortable ease of a man who had never once needed to raise his voice to make a point. It was completely a threat. Vivian looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then she nodded. Once, politely, turned away, and walked to Denise's counter. Denise was waiting with a clean towel and a look in her eyes that held 31 years of her own. You all right? Denise asked quietly. I'm fine, Vivian said. She thanked her. She nodded to Jerome, who was watching from the corner booth with his phone still in his hand and his eyes saying everything his mouth didn't need to. She picked up her soaked files. She walked to the kitchen doorway where Cassie was still standing, untying and retying her apron strings the way people do when their hands need something to do. Go back to work, Vivian said gently. Hold your head up. Cassie nodded. She stood a little straighter. Vivian walked out into the September sun. She found her car, unlocked it, and sat down. She set the soaked files on the passenger seat. She put both hands on the steering wheel and looked at the windshield for a long moment. At the diner behind her, at the street ahead of her, at the ordinary Tuesday morning of a county that had no idea what was coming. 31 years, he'd said. She started the car. We'll see about that. The DA's office smelled like old carpet and stale coffee, and something else underneath both of those things, something institutional and slightly anxious, like a room full of people who had been waiting a long time to find out which way the wind was going to blow. Vivian walked in at 8:15 Wednesday morning in a fresh blazer, her natural hair restored, her gold earrings back in place. She carried her briefcase in one hand and a cup of Fuller's coffee in the other. She had stopped at the diner on the way, partly because the coffee was better than anything the office would have, and partly because she wanted Denise to see her walking straight. Murphy Wenz was waiting at the front of the office. He was 44 years old, lean and sharp-featured, with the kind of carefully composed expression that told Vivian he had been composing it since well before she arrived. He was good at his job. She had chosen him herself, 2 months before her swearing in, after reading every case he had ever tried in this county. He was loyal, he was precise, and right now he was holding her morning calendar with both hands like it might try to escape. "Good morning," he said. "Who called in?" Vivian said. He blinked. 3 people. "Which 3?" he told her. All 3 were holdovers from the previous DA's office, people who had been here long enough to have built comfortable relationships with the sheriff's department, long enough to understand what it meant that the new DA had made headlines before her first official day. Vivian noted the names. She said nothing. She walked to her office, set down her briefcase, and got to work. By 9 o'clock, she had submitted a formal written request to the Sheriff's Department for Officer Darwin Perkinson's complete personnel file. Every complaint, every commendation, every internal review, every piece of paper with his name on it going back to his first day on the job. She sent it through official channels, properly formatted, with a response deadline of 5 business days as permitted under county records protocol. By noon, Murphy appeared at her office door. "They say it's being compiled." Vivian looked up from the case file she was reviewing. "Being compiled." That's the language they used. Being compiled. She nodded slowly and went back to reading. By 4 o'clock, Murphy was back. "Processing delay." She set her pen down. "What kind of delay?" "They didn't specify." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked her pen back up. "All right." At 5 o'clock, her desk phone rang. The voice on the other end was warm and unhurried. The voice of a man who made calls like this the way other men made small talk. Sheriff Dale Odom, 61 years old, had run the Harlan County Sheriff's Department for 11 years. He had a reputation for being reasonable, for being collegial, for being the kind of law enforcement leader that county commissioners liked to photograph themselves standing next to. "Ms. Monroe," he practically beamed through the line. "Just wanted to call personally and say congratulations on your swearing in. Long overdue, if you ask me. Really, this county needed some fresh energy in that office. Thank you, Sheriff. I mean it. And listen, I just want you to know that my department's door is always open to you. Always. We've had a real productive working relationship with the DA's office over the years, and I know that's something we all want to preserve going forward." A brief, warm pause. "I genuinely look forward to working with you." Every word was perfect. Every word was a wall. "I look forward to it as well," Vivian said. "I'll follow up on that records request first thing tomorrow." There was a beat. Just one. Barely a second long. "Of course. We'll get that sorted out for you real soon." She hung up. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at her office door. Murphy was in the hallway pretending to read something. "Murphy." He appeared in the doorway immediately. "I need every civil complaint filed against any officer in this county over the last 10 years. Don't go through the sheriff's office. Go through the courts directly. Filed records, public docket, anything that passed through a clerk's hands." Murphy wrote it down. All of them. Every single one. He nodded. He started to turn away. Then he stopped. "Vivian." He said it carefully, like a man testing the weight of a question before he asked it. "How big do you think this is?" She picked up her pen. "I think," she said, that we're just getting started. Angela Paston didn't knock so much as appear. One moment, Vivian's doorway was empty, and the next, it contained a woman of 51 with close-cropped natural hair going silver at the temples, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and a manila envelope held against her chest like she had been carrying it for so long it had become part of her. She wore a press badge clipped to her jacket, and the expression of someone who had been waiting a very long time to be in this exact room. Ms. Monroe. She didn't wait to be invited. She stepped inside, pulled the door half-closed behind her, and set the envelope on the desk between them. My name is Angela Paston. I write for the Harlan County Courier. I've been trying to get someone to look at what's in that envelope for 2 years. Vivian looked at the envelope, then at Angela. Sit down. Angela sat. What came out of that envelope landed on Vivian's desk in careful, organized layers, the work of a woman who had been building something in private for a long time and knew exactly how to present it. Affidavits from 6 people who had filed formal complaints against Officer Darwin Perkinson between 2014 and 2023. 4 black men and women, 1 Latino man, 1 white woman in her 70s who had lived in Harlan County her whole life and described what happened to her in 3 short paragraphs that were somehow worse for their brevity. Every single complaint had been dismissed. Everyone marked unsubstantiated, that flat, bureaucratic word that meant, in practice, that someone with more power than the person complaining had decided the complaining should stop. 3 of the 6 complainants reported being pulled over by county officers within 2 weeks of filing. One man, a small business owner named Geo Morrison, who ran an auto repair shop on the east side, had a surprise health and safety inspection the week after he submitted his affidavit. The inspection turned up violations that had never been cited in 7 previous inspections. His shop was fined. He withdrew the complaint. I took all of this to the previous DA, Angela said. Her voice was even, but there was something beneath it. The specific exhaustion of a person who had been right about something for a long time without anyone listening. Twice. The first time, I got a meeting with a junior staffer. The second time, I got a letter telling me the matters had been reviewed internally and found to be without merit. Vivian was still reading. Who else have you taken this to? County Oversight Board. State Press Association. I wrote the story twice. My editor killed it both times. Different reasons each time, but the same result. She folded her hands on her knee. The first time, he said there wasn't enough sourcing. The second time, he said the timing wasn't right. And your editor? Does he golf? Angela looked at her. Every Saturday. He and Sheriff Odom have been in the same foursome for 6 years. Vivian set the papers down. She looked at Angela Paston directly. At the 2 years in her face, the patience and the frustration living right next to each other, and made a decision. There's something else, Angela said. Denise Fuller has called the department twice, about Perkinson specifically, about his conduct toward her staff when he comes in on Tuesdays. She paused. Both calls were logged. Both were closed without action. That diner is not just where this started, Ms. Monroe. It has history. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Come back Monday. Angela nodded. She began gathering her documents. Leave the copies, Vivian said. That Thursday evening, Vivian drove to a coffee shop 12 blocks from the diner and sat across from Cassie Burns, who arrived 5 minutes early in her work apron, hair still pulled back from her shift, hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking from. Vivian listened. All of it. The Tuesdays, the comments, the particular way Perkinson spoke to the younger servers when Denise wasn't close enough to intervene. The silent understanding among the staff that you absorbed it and moved on because the alternative was worse. Cassie spoke quietly, carefully, like someone reading from a document they had kept locked inside themselves for months. When she finished, Vivian explained what a formal witness statement meant, what it required, what it did not obligate Cassie to do alone. Cassie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "When you said it wasn't my fault, in the diner, why did you say that? You didn't even know me." "Because it was true," Vivian said simply. "And because nobody had said it to you yet." Cassie set down her cup. She straightened in her chair, shoulders back, chin level, in the way of someone who has just decided something they won't be undeciding. "Okay," she said. "I'll give the statement. Pammy Owen lived in a neat brick house on the quiet end of Sycamore Drive, with wind chimes on the porch and a welcome mat that said blessed in faded letters. She answered the door in a cardigan and reading glasses, and when Murphy Wenz showed his DA's office identification, she looked at it for a long moment before she looked at him. "I figured someone would come," she said. She let him in. Her living room was tidy and warm, framed family photos on the walls, a Bible on the side table, a television playing the morning news on low volume. She sat across from Murphy in a floral armchair and folded her hands in her lap, and told him everything with the quiet, careful honesty of a woman confessing something she already knew she should have done differently. She had recorded for almost 2 full minutes. She had the whole thing, the pour, the laugh, Perkinson's face, all of it. And then the captain had sat down across from her with his warm smile and his reasonable voice, and suggested, gently, that personal recordings of officers could get complicated, that things could be misrepresented, that she seemed like a sensible woman, that sensible women understood how these situations worked. She had deleted it before she got home. "I'm sorry," she said. She was looking at her hands. "I know what I saw. I know what I had. And I just—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I got scared. That man had a badge, and I'm 62 years old, and I got scared." Murphy leaned forward. "Mrs. Owen, before you deleted it, did you send any part of it to anyone?" She looked up. Something shifted in her expression. Not guilt this time. Something closer to hope, the fragile, uncertain kind. "My granddaughter," she said slowly. "Katie. I texted her while it was happening. Just a clip. I didn't even think about it. I just sent it because she always says I never tell her anything interesting." She paused. I don't know how much she got. Murphy had his phone out before she finished the sentence. Katie Owen was 19 years old and a sophomore at Georgia State, and she did not intimidate easily. That was the first thing Vivian noticed when Katie walked into the DA's office Friday afternoon. The way she carried herself, unhurried and direct, like a young woman who had already decided she was going to do the right thing and was simply waiting for someone to point her in the right direction. She had 17 seconds. She pulled up the clip on her phone and set it on Vivian's desk without preamble. Vivian watched it once, then again, then a third time. It was enough. The pour was clear. The laugh was clear. And Perkinson's voice, unhurried, satisfied, completely certain of itself, was unmistakable. "Oops," my hand slipped. Then the laugh again. Easy, unbothered. The sound of a man who had never once considered that anything would come of it. Murphy watched it a fourth time. Then he went still. "Look at the background," he said quietly. Vivian looked. In the far edge of the frame, slightly out of focus but completely visible, stood Cassie Burns, still holding the plate, face frozen in that hollow, stricken expression, shock and guilt, and the particular horror of someone who understood exactly what had just happened and felt responsible for all of it. It was everything Cassie's written statement described. It was right there in 17 seconds, corroborated without either of them knowing it. Vivian sat back in her chair. She looked at Katie. "Thank you." "Is it enough?" Katie asked. "It's a very good start." Vivian filed the clip into evidence before the day was out, put a litigation hold on it, and said nothing to Angela Paston. She was not ready to move that piece yet. She needed to know the full shape of the board before she showed anyone what was in her hand. That Saturday morning, she sat at Hector Sims's kitchen table for 2 hours. He was 71 years old, a retired postal worker with large hands and a quiet, measured way of speaking that told Vivian he had spent a lifetime being careful about what he said and to whom. He made coffee without asking if she wanted any. He set out a plate of butter cookies. Then he told her about 2018, about Perkinson, about the complaint he filed and the 2 weeks that followed, the patrol car that seemed to appear whenever he left his house, the registration notice that materialized out of nowhere and then disappeared just as quickly once he called the department to ask about withdrawing his complaint. "I didn't withdraw it," he said firmly. "I want you to know that. I didn't withdraw it. I just stopped, expecting anything from it." Sunday afternoon, Vivian drove to a church community room on the south side and sat with 2 more complainants. Different names, different years, different specific details, the same shape underneath all of it, the same unmistakable pattern of a system that had learned how to make problems disappear before they became inconvenient. By Sunday evening, she had personally spoken to all 6 people from Angela's files. 6 different lives, 6 different stories, every single one ending the same way. I filed. And then something happened to make me wish I hadn't. She drove home in the dark, the city moving past her windows, and called Murphy. "We're not building a misconduct case," she said. "We're building organized retaliation. That's a different animal entirely." A pause on the other end. "How many people does that take down?" Murphy asked. Vivian kept her eyes on the road. "I don't know yet," she said. "Let's find out." Vivian had barely gotten through her front door when her phone rang. She set her keys on the counter and looked at the screen. Denise Fuller. She picked up on the second ring. "I've been watching," Denise said. No greeting, no preamble, just the voice of a woman who had made a decision and was moving before she could change her mind. "I've been watching you fight this thing all week, watching them push back, watching that captain smile and that sheriff call and that judge." She stopped, took a breath. "I have something. I've had it for 9 years, and I think it's time I stopped holding it." Vivian set her briefcase down slowly. "Tell me." In 2015, Denise's nephew Devin Fuller was 22 years old. He worked the night shift at a logistics warehouse on the north end of the county. Loading, unloading, the kind of work that left your back sore and your hands rough, and your body ready for bed the moment your feet hit the door. He walked home most nights because his car was in the shop for 3 weeks that summer, and the bus didn't run late enough to meet his shift. One night in August, Officer Darwin Perkinson stopped him 2 blocks from his apartment. No cause, no explanation. Devin was walking on the sidewalk, minding every piece of his own business, and the patrol car rolled up slow beside him and the window came down, and Perkinson told him to put his hands where he could see them. Devin was held on that sidewalk for 40 minutes. No arrest, no citation. Nothing written down, nothing official, nothing that would ever appear in any record. Just a 22-year-old man standing on a public sidewalk with his hands visible while a uniformed officer made him feel like a suspect for the crime of walking home from work. He called Denise from the sidewalk when Perkinson finally drove away. She could still hear exactly how his voice had sounded. She had never forgotten it. The particular flatness of someone who has just been reminded, in the most direct way possible, that certain protections do not extend to them. They filed the complaint together the next morning. Denise helped him write every word. 6 days later, a county health inspector appeared at Fuller's family diner. His name was Gordon Marsh. He arrived with a clipboard and a list of violations that Denise had never once been cited for in 31 years of running her establishment. Fire code issues, ventilation concerns, a refrigeration unit that he claimed was not meeting temperature standards. The inspection report was 12 pages long. Denise had passed her last inspection 8 months earlier without a single flag. She appealed through the state. She won. Eventually. But eventually took 4 months, $14,000 in legal fees, and 3 weeks of closure that cost her more than money. It cost her regulars who found other places during those 3 weeks and never fully came back. It cost her 2 employees she had to let go temporarily, and one she never got back at all. She never connected it publicly to Devon's complaint. She connected it privately, every day, for 9 years. She kept the documentation because she did not know what else to do with it. The original inspection report, the appeal paperwork, Gordon Marsh's signature on every page. She kept it the way people keep evidence when they have no power to act on it, but cannot bring themselves to let it disappear. His name is Gordon Marsh, Denise said. He retired 3 years ago. Lives out past the county line. Vivian was already writing. Monday morning, Murphy found Gordon Marsh's number before 9 o'clock. Marsh picked up on the 3rd ring. When Murphy explained who he was calling on behalf of, there was a silence on the other end. Not the silence of a man with nothing to say, but the silence of a man who had been carrying something uncomfortable for a very long time and had just heard a door open. He agreed to speak. He drove to the DA's office that afternoon and sat across from Vivian with his hands folded on the table and the careful, relieved expression of someone setting down a weight they had been holding longer than was good for them. He confirmed it, carefully and completely. The work order for Denise Fuller's inspection had come from outside the normal scheduling rotation. Someone had flagged the address specifically. He could not name who. He had not asked, because in his experience, when something came from that direction, you did not ask. But he had kept his field notes. He was a meticulous man, 30 years in the job, and he kept notes on everything. His notes showed the work order arriving the same week Devon Fuller's complaint was filed against Officer Perkinson. The same week. Not the week after. Not 2 weeks later. The same week. Vivian looked at the notes for a long moment. Then she looked at Gordon Marsh. "Thank you," she said, "for keeping these." He nodded slowly. "I kept them because I knew what they were," he said. "I just didn't know who to give them to." Monday evening, Vivian called Atlanta. Devon Fuller picked up on the 2nd ring. He was 31 now, 9 years removed from that sidewalk, 9 years removed from this county, 9 years of building a life somewhere that didn't carry the particular weight that Harlan County had always carried for him. Vivian told him who she was. She told him why she was calling. She told him what she had found. The silence that followed was long enough that she checked the screen to make sure the call was still connected. Then his voice came back, measured and careful, and full of something that had been sitting in him for a very long time without anywhere to go. "I've been waiting 9 years for somebody to call me about this." "I know," Vivian said. "I'm sorry it took this long. Are you willing to talk?" She heard him exhale. "I'll be there Saturday," he said. The letter arrived Tuesday morning in a cream-colored envelope with an Atlanta return address and the name of a law firm printed across the top in the kind of font that cost money just to look at. Vivian read all 14 pages. The police union had retained outside counsel, expensive, fast, and very good at making aggression sound like concern. The letter cited potential political persecution of law enforcement. It referenced a chilling effect on officer morale. It used the word frivolous 4 times across 14 pages, and each time it appeared, it was doing the same job, trying to make Vivian's case feel small before it had a chance to grow. She filed it in the bottom drawer of her desk and went back to work. By Thursday, the other local paper, not Angela's, the one owned by a man who had been playing golf with Sheriff Odom every Saturday for 6 years, ran a front-page column. The headline asked, in the careful language of a man who understood plausible deniability, whether the new district attorney was using her office to pursue a personal vendetta rather than focusing on the serious business of running the county's legal apparatus. The column quoted sources within law enforcement who described the diner incident as a minor accident being blown entirely out of proportion by political opportunism. It did not mention Cassie Burns. It did not mention broken eggs or a trembling hand or a captain who had arrived 11 minutes after being privately texted. It presented the story as beginning at the moment of the pour, as though nothing had come before it, and nothing beneath it was worth examining. Vivian did not respond to the column. She did not call a press conference. She did not release a statement. She went to work. 2 members of her inherited staff came to Murphy separately that week, not to Vivian directly, which told her everything she needed to know about their read of the situation. They suggested, with the careful phrasing of people covering themselves, that the new DA might want to consider the optics of leading with this particular case, that there were bigger fish, that relationships in this county took time to build and very little time to damage. Murphy relayed both conversations to Vivian word for word. She thanked him and told him to get the Oversight Board presentation ready. The County Oversight Board met Friday morning in a wood-paneled room on the 2nd floor of the municipal building. 7 members, theoretically independent of the Sheriff's Department, theoretically empowered to review law enforcement conduct without interference. Vivian had spent 3 evenings preparing the presentation. Organized, sourced, documented at every turn. The complaint history. The pattern of dismissed filings. Angela's 2 years of documentation. Cassie's statement. The 17-second video. Gordon Marsh's field notes. The 2015 timeline connecting Devin Fuller's complaint to Denise Fuller's inspection. She laid it out methodically, without theater, without appeal to emotion. Just the evidence, stacked and clean and impossible to look away from. 2 board members looked at the table throughout. One asked 3 clarifying questions that were actually attempts to find procedural exits. But the documentation was too organized, too sourced, too thoroughly constructed to dismiss with a procedural murmur, and everyone in that room knew it. The vote was 4-2. Perkinson was placed on paid administrative leave, pending full investigation. Walking back to her car, Vivian allowed herself one quiet moment. Just the warm weight of it. The forward movement of something that had been stationary for 9 years, finally beginning to shift. She thought about Devin Fuller driving up from Atlanta that weekend. She thought about Hector Sims at his kitchen table with his butter cookies and his careful, measured voice. Not yet, she thought, but close. Murphy was at her office door before she had taken off her coat Monday morning. He was holding a legal brief. His face had an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something stripped of its usual composure. Something that told her the news was not the kind that improved with delivery. Judge Harry Frederick had issued an order. She read it, standing up. Frederick had found a technical defect in how the county complaint records had been transferred from the Sheriff's Department to the Oversight Board. A minor procedural error, the kind that could be corrected in days under normal circumstances. But his order didn't treat it as minor. His language cast doubt on the chain of custody of all transferred evidence. The word integrity appeared 4 times, each one a small, precise cut. By noon, the union's Atlanta attorney was on the courthouse steps. Perkinson stood beside him in his pressed uniform, looking like a man who had just been told he won something. A politically motivated attack, the attorney said into the microphones, found legally deficient by a sitting judge. By 3 o'clock, Perkinson's suspension was lifted. He would return to active duty Monday. At 4:45, Vivian's phone rang. Hector Sims. His voice was quiet and controlled in the specific way of a man managing something that frightened him. Someone had broken into his car overnight. Nothing was taken. But his glove compartment had been gone through, the one where he kept a personal copy of his 2018 affidavit. Vivian sat in her office for a long time after that call. She was not afraid. She was something colder than afraid and more useful than anger. She was certain of exactly what she was fighting, certain of exactly how far it was willing to go, and certain that going through proper channels at half speed was no longer a strategy. She picked up the phone. "Murphy, clear my Thursday and Friday." Vivian drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. The city thinned out around her as she moved south, the municipal buildings and the courthouse giving way to gas stations and strip malls, and then to something quieter, older, streets lined with oak trees whose roots had been pushing up the sidewalks for 40 years without anyone doing much about it. She knew this drive the way she knew her own heartbeat. She had been making it her whole life. Her mother's house sat at the end of Briarwood Lane with the porch light already on. It was always on when Ella Monroe was expecting someone, and Ella always seemed to know when her daughter was coming, even when she hadn't been told. The garden out front was still holding on against the October chill, stubborn the way Ella herself was stubborn, the way everything her mother touched seemed to become. Vivian sat in the car for a moment before she got out. Just a moment. Just long enough to set down the weight she had been carrying since Monday morning and decide how much of it she was bringing inside. She took most of it with her. Her mother would know anyway. Ella Monroe was 74 years old and had lived in Harlan County, Georgia, her entire life. She had taught 6th grade English at the same elementary school for 28 years. She had raised Vivian alone after Vivian's father left when Vivian was 9, in the particular manner of a woman who refused to let absence become an excuse for anything. She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall and had her daughter's same eyes, clear, direct, the kind that made people feel seen whether they wanted to be or not. She was setting the table when Vivian came through the door. She didn't ask how the week had gone. She didn't mention the column in the paper or the news about Frederick's order or Perkinson's return to duty, though Vivian knew she was aware of all of it. Ella Monroe had always known everything that moved through this county, the way a person knows the weather when they have lived long enough in one place to read the sky. She set down a plate of cornbread. She ladled out 2 bowls of the vegetable soup she had been making since noon. She sat across from her daughter and unfolded her napkin and said, "Eat." Vivian ate. For a while, neither of them said anything. The house was warm and quiet. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, the wind moved through the oak trees on Briarwood Lane, and the porch light held steady against the dark. Then Ella set down her spoon. "You want to tell me about it?" she said. "Or you want me to tell you what I already know?" Vivian looked up. "You go first." Ella was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was measured and low, the voice she used in classrooms, the one that could hold a room of 30 11-year-olds completely still. "I watched complaints go nowhere in this county for 40 years, she said. "I watched good people, careful people, people who did everything right, file the right papers, talk to the right offices, follow every rule they were given. And I watched it amount to nothing. Every time. Because the people running the machinery knew exactly how to keep it running in their favor." She paused. "And the ones who didn't know how to work the machinery, the ones who just wanted to be heard, they were the ones who paid for it." Vivian said nothing. She was listening the way she always listened to her mother. Completely. "They are not fighting a complaint, baby." Ella looked at her daughter directly, the way she always had, the way that left no room for misunderstanding. "They are not fighting a video or a personnel file or a retaliation pattern. They spent 30 years making sure nobody like you would ever sit in that chair." She leaned forward slightly. "And then you sat in it anyway. That's what they can't stand. That's what all of this is really about. Not the case, not the evidence, the fact of you. The kitchen clock ticked. Vivian sat with that for a long moment. The way it landed, the way it rearranged something she had already known, but hadn't yet named. She drove home an hour later with the windows down, despite the chill, needing the cold air and the dark road, and the particular clarity that came from moving through the night with no one else around. She made tea when she got home. She sat at her kitchen table. She opened a fresh legal pad and picked up a pen. She thought about Hector Sims's quiet voice on the phone, about Devin Fuller driving 4 hours from Atlanta after 9 years away, about Cassie Burns straightening her spine in a coffee shop and saying yes without being asked twice, about Denise Fuller and 9 years of documents kept in a filing cabinet because she didn't know what else to do with the truth. She thought about her mother's voice. The fact of you. She wrote 2 words at the top of the page. Grand jury. She underlined them once. Then she got to work. By Sunday evening, the legal pad had company. 3 pages of notes. A timeline running from 2014 to the present. A column of names on the left margin and a column of actions on the right. Vivian had worked through Saturday night and most of Sunday with the focused quiet of a woman who had stopped reacting and started building. The tea went cold. She made more. The kitchen light burned until 2 in the morning and was on again before 6. Murphy arrived at the office Monday at 7:30 and found her already there. He looked at the whiteboard she had filled across one wall of her office, names, dates, connecting lines drawn in red marker, and stood in the doorway for a long moment without speaking. Grand jury, Vivian said, without looking up from the file she was reading. Murphy set down his coffee. Frederick can't touch a grand jury. No, she said. He cannot. A grand jury operated under Georgia state law, convened at the direct authority of the district attorney, and presented evidence before a panel of citizens rather than a judge. It did not pass through Harry Frederick's courtroom. It did not pass through any courtroom. It was not subject to the procedural gatekeeping that had swallowed their evidence once already. It was the right instrument, not a workaround, not a shortcut, but the correct legal mechanism applied to exactly the right set of facts at exactly the right moment. Vivian had spent 2 days making certain of that. She had also spent part of Sunday drafting a formal letter to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, requesting a state-level review of potential obstruction of justice, specifically the pattern of retaliatory action against complainants dating back to 2014, the 2015 health inspection work order, and the break-in at Hector Sims's vehicle. The GBI operated at the state level. It sat entirely outside Sheriff Odom's jurisdictional reach. He could not call it with warm congratulations. He could not manage it with courteous suggestions about productive working relationships. She signed the letter Monday morning and had it couriered before 9 o'clock. Perkinson returned to active duty at 8 that morning. Vivian knew because Murphy had someone at the precinct who texted him. She read the message, set her phone face down on her desk, and went back to preparing the grand jury documentation. She did not allow herself to feel the unfairness of that image. Perkinson back in his uniform, back on the streets, back in the building he had occupied for 17 years, like a man who owned it. She had learned a long time ago that feeling the unfairness of something and using it were 2 different operations, and only one of them moved the case forward. She worked through lunch. Tuesday morning she drove to Fuller's family diner. Not for strategy, not for evidence. She drove there because there was something she needed to do in person. And there was only one way to do it. The diner was quiet at mid-morning. The breakfast rush settled. The lunch crowd not yet arrived. Denise was behind the counter restocking the coffee station, moving with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had opened this place every morning for 31 years and intended to keep doing it. She looked up when the door opened. When she saw Vivian, Something in her face shifted. Not surprise, but recognition. The look of a woman who had been hoping and hadn't let herself say so. Vivian sat at the counter. Denise set a cup in front of her without being asked. "I need you to testify," Vivian said. Denise set the coffee pot down. She stood very still for a moment, both hands on the counter. The morning light came through the front windows and fell across the worn surface between them. "I've been waiting 9 years for someone to ask me that," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "Just barely. Just once." And she straightened immediately, and neither of them mentioned it. On the way out, Vivian passed the counter where Cassie Burns was starting her shift, tying her apron strings in the careful, deliberate way of someone who was also tying something else together inside themselves. She looked up when she heard Vivian's footsteps. "Is anything actually going to happen?" Cassie asked. Quiet, direct. The question of a young woman who had been let down enough times to need to ask. "To him, I mean. Is it?" Vivian looked at her steadily. "Yes," she said. "I promise you." She walked out into the Tuesday morning. The grand jury convened, the GBI formally engaged, Denise and Cassie committed, and Darwin Perkinson back on duty, without the faintest idea that the battlefield had moved completely out from under him. The grand jury room was smaller than most people imagined. No gallery, no audience, no rows of seats filled with reporters and concerned citizens and people who had driven across the county to watch history get made. Just a long table, 12 citizens of Harlan County seated along one side of it, and Vivian Monroe standing at the front of the room with everything she had built over the past 3 weeks organized into a presentation that was going to be impossible to look away from. She had been preparing for this her entire career. She started with the personnel file. 17 years of Officer Darwin Perkinson's record, obtained finally through state court order when the Sheriff's Department's processing delays ran out of legal runway. She walked the jury through it page by page, not dramatically, not with theater, just clearly and completely. The way you walk someone through a building when you want them to understand its full floor plan before you show them what's been hidden in the walls. The complaints, the dismissals, the pattern. Then, the video. Katie Owen, 19 years old, sat in the witness chair with her phone and her grandmother's story, and the particular composure of a young woman who had decided she was not going to be afraid of this room. She explained how she received the clip, when she received it, and why she still had it when everyone assumed it was gone. She played it for the jury. 17 seconds. Perkinson's voice, clear as anything. "Oops!" My hand slipped. Then the laugh. Easy. Unbothered. The sound of a man who had never once imagined he would be sitting in a room like this. Angela Paston followed with 2 years of documentation, organized, sourced, and delivered with the steady precision of a journalist who had been waiting a very long time to tell this story to an audience with the authority to act on it. Then, the complainants. 4 came in person. 2 submitted sworn written statements that Vivian read into the record herself, standing at the front of the room, her voice even and clear. Geo Morrison, the auto repair shop owner, testified about 2019, about filing his complaint and watching a health inspector appear at his business 6 days later, with violations that had never once been cited in 7 previous inspections, about the calculation he had made, fight it or keep his livelihood, about the thing he had lost either way. A woman named Rosa Vega testified about 2021, about being stopped on her way to pick up her children from school, held on the side of the road for 25 minutes with no citation issued and no explanation given, and about the formal complaint she filed that was marked unsubstantiated before she had even received written confirmation it had been received. Hector Sims came last among the in-person complainants. He was 71 years old and he wore his best suit. dark navy, pressed sharp, a white pocket square folded with care. He sat in the witness chair with his large hands resting flat on his knees and told the jury about 2018 in the same quiet, measured voice he had used at his kitchen table when he told Vivian. He did not perform his anger. He did not ask for sympathy. He simply told the truth from beginning to end, and his hands were completely steady throughout. When he finished, the room was very quiet. Devin Fuller sat down next. He was 31 years old, and he had driven from Atlanta, and he had not been in this county in 9 years. He wore a button-down shirt, and he sat straight in the chair, and he told the story of August 2015, the sidewalk, the 40 minutes, the patrol car rolling slow. Without anger, without editorial, without a single omission or exaggeration. Just the facts, laid out in order, the way a man tells a story he has been carrying for 9 years, and finally has somewhere to put it. Denise Fuller testified about the 9 years, the $14,000, the 3 weeks of closure, the 2 employees she lost, the nephew who didn't come back. She brought her documents in a folder and set them on the table in front of her, and kept her hands folded on top of them while she spoke, like she was making sure they didn't disappear. Gordon Marsh followed with his field notes. And then, last, Cassie Burns. She was 19 years old, and she had never given legal testimony in her life. And she sat in that chair like someone who had decided that being afraid was not the same as being stopped. She told the jury about the Tuesdays, about the way Perkinson spoke to the staff when Denise wasn't close enough to hear, about the eggs he broke himself, and the words he used on her, and the way her hands had shaken while she stood there absorbing it. She used the word afraid once. Then she said always, as in, it was not new. It was not one Tuesday. It was always. Not one juror in the room missed what that word meant. The panel deliberated for 4 hours. When the forewoman stood up, the room was so quiet, Vivian could hear the clock on the wall behind her. "We find true bills," the forewoman said, "on all counts." The indictments were filed at 9:17 Wednesday morning. Vivian stood at the window of her office while Murphy handled the paperwork, watching the street below. The ordinary Wednesday morning of Harlan County moving past, without knowing yet that something had just permanently changed inside the building above it. A delivery truck. A woman walking fast with a coffee cup. 2 men in hard hats looking at something on a clipboard. Normal. Unremarkable. The kind of morning that had no idea it was historic. She turned from the window. The charges were precise and thorough and built to hold. Officer Darwin Perkinson. Official misconduct. A felony under Georgia state law. Criminal intimidation. Civil rights violations. And, based on the evidence reviewed by the GBI in the weeks since she had sent that letter by courier on a Monday morning, tampering with a witness. Hector Sims's glove compartment. The affidavit that someone had gone looking for in the dark. Captain Roy Berman. Obstruction of justice. Abuse of official position. Conspiracy to suppress civil rights complaints. Coordinating retaliatory action against complainants. A charge built on Gordon Marsh's field notes. The 2015 work order. And the precise, damning alignment of its timing with Devin Fuller's complaint filing. Vivian read through the final documents one last time. Then she picked up the phone and called Denise Fuller. It rang twice. "It's done," Vivian said. The sound that came through the phone was not a word. It was something older and deeper than a word, the sound of 9 years of held breath finally, completely released. Denise did not speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was rough and certain, and full of something that had been waiting a very long time to become real. "Thank you," she said. "Baby, thank you." Vivian stood at her window a moment longer after she hung up. She let herself feel it. Just for that moment. Just completely. Before she put it away and went back to work. There was still a great deal of work. The arrests happened Thursday morning. Perkinson was taken into custody at the precinct. Not at his home. Not quietly, in the early morning before the building filled. At the precinct. His precinct. The building he had walked into every working day for 17 years, with the loose, unhurried confidence of a man who owned the floor under his feet. He was in the break room when they came for him. 2 GBI agents and a county officer he didn't know. Someone from outside his circle. Someone whose loyalty wasn't already spoken for. Perkinson looked at them, and then at the document in the lead agent's hand, and then at the 6 colleagues standing in various positions around the room. At the counter with coffee cups, in the doorway, at the table by the window, all of them going perfectly, horribly still. He said something. Vivian would hear later from Murphy that he said it quietly, not with the theatrical confidence of a man who had always had the room, just quietly, like a man who had suddenly run out of road and couldn't quite believe there was no more of it. Nobody in the room moved to help him. The 2 administrative staff members near the door stepped back. The intern, 22 years old, 3rd week on the job, who had spent those 3 weeks navigating the ambient certainty of a department that believed in its own untouchability, watched from the hallway with wide eyes and said nothing. Perkinson was walked out of the building in handcuffs at 9:43 in the morning. Berman was arrested at his house at 10:15. His wife was in the front garden when the cars pulled up. She stood and watched with her gardening gloves still on her hands, and she did not say anything, and she did not move toward him. Berman came out of the front door in a shirt and slacks. He had been home, which meant someone had called ahead, which the GBI had anticipated and documented. He looked at his wife once as they walked him to the car. She looked away first. He did not look back. By noon, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation issued a public statement. A broader review of complaint suppression practices within the Harlan County Sheriff's Department was now formally underway. The language of the statement was careful and official and thoroughly devastating. The kind of language that meant the review was not going to stop at 2 people. By 2 o'clock, Sheriff Odom released a statement of his own. He would not be seeking re-election. He wanted to spend more time with his family. He used that phrase twice, as though repetition made it more convincing. Nobody who read it was surprised. Nobody who read it was particularly moved. By 4 o'clock, Judge Harry Frederick had quietly filed a recusal from all active cases involving the Sheriff's Department. The recusal cited potential conflicts requiring further review. It was not voluntary in any meaningful sense of the word. It was the action of a man who could read a situation and had decided that distance was now his best available option. Murphy appeared at Vivian's office door at 4:15. He looked different than he had on Monday morning. Less like a man managing his fear and more like a man who had watched something he helped build actually stand up and hold. He leaned against the doorframe. "Frederick recused," he said. "I saw. Odom's not running. I saw that too." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You knew it would go this far?" Vivian looked up from her desk. She thought about her mother's kitchen, about a legal pad and 2 underlined words at 2 in the morning, about a 17-second video and a 19-year-old girl who drove to this office and set her phone on the desk without being asked. "I knew what the evidence said," she said. "I just made sure everyone else got to hear it." The consequences didn't slow down after Thursday. They accelerated. By Thursday afternoon, footage of both arrests was running on the local evening news. A 30-second clip of Perkinson being walked out of the precinct in handcuffs that the station played 4 times in the first hour. By Thursday evening, Angela Paston's story was live on the Courier's website. built from 2 years of documentation and one DA who had finally taken her call. By midnight, it had been picked up by 3 state outlets. By Friday morning, it was national. The 17-second video ran on every major network. Perkinson's union attorney released a statement calling the charges political. Nobody was surprised. Nobody was particularly moved. The statement was 11 paragraphs long, and the only thing anyone remembered about it by the end of the day was that it existed, which was the least convincing kind of defense a statement could offer. The calls started Friday morning and did not stop. Geo Morrison called first, the auto repair shop owner who had withdrawn his complaint in 2019 and carried the weight of that withdrawal ever since. He said 3 words before his voice gave out on him. He called back 10 minutes later and said the rest. Rosa Vega called. Hector Sims called. Not about anything specific, just to say thank you, twice, in the careful measured voice of a man who had spent 9 years not expecting a call like the one Vivian had made to him, and who needed her to understand what it had meant. The calls came from people Vivian had never met. Women who knew someone who filed something that went nowhere. Men who had grown up in this county understanding certain protections did not extend to them. People who had absorbed that understanding so deeply it had become part of how they moved through the world, and who were now sitting with their phones in their hands, trying to figure out what to do with the unfamiliar feeling that something had shifted. Devin Fuller called Denise from his hotel room Friday morning. He had not yet left Harlan County. He had been unable to make himself go. He stayed on the phone with her for an hour, and when Denise told Vivian about it later, she said his voice had sounded like a man who was slowly, carefully setting something down that he had been carrying in both hands for a very long time. Pammy Owen called at noon. "I want to apologize," she said, "for deleting it, for letting that man sit down across from me and talk me out of doing the right thing." Her voice was steady but effortful, the voice of a woman pushing through something uncomfortable because it needed to be said. "I've been thinking about it every single day since." "Mrs. Owen," Vivian said, "that man had 31 years of practice making people feel exactly the way he made you feel. That is not a character flaw. That is what institutional power is designed to do." Pammy was quiet for a moment. "Katie gets her backbone from her grandmother, you know. I just misplaced mine that day." "You found it," Vivian said. "That's what counts." Jerome Walter sent a note, handwritten, 1 line, slipped under the DA's office door sometime Friday afternoon. "Harlan County just figured out who you are." Vivian read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her desk drawer. The good drawer. The one she kept things in that she wanted to find again someday. The County Oversight Board voted unanimously Friday afternoon to begin a full audit of complaint processing procedures going back 15 years. The governor's office called to formally acknowledge the GBI review and express support for the investigation. By Friday evening, 2 members of Vivian's inherited staff, who had called in sick on her first morning, had sent emails requesting meetings. She would take those meetings. She would be fair about them, but she would remember. 3 weeks later, a Tuesday morning in October. The light through Fuller's windows had changed. Summer gold gone, replaced by something cooler and more honest, the kind of autumn light that showed things clearly without flattering them. The oak trees down Clement Street had started turning. A few leaves had made it to the sidewalk. Vivian Monroe pulled into the diner parking lot at 11 o'clock. She sat in the car for a moment before she went in. The same moment she always took on Tuesdays. Just enough time to be still. Just enough time to feel the full weight of where she was and how she had gotten here. Then she got out. The bell above the door rang when she pushed it open. Denise looked up from the counter. The smile that crossed her face was not the careful, guarded expression of a woman managing a Tuesday. It was full and open and completely undefended. The smile of someone who had been carrying something heavy for 9 years and had finally, permanently, set it down. She didn't say anything. She reached for the coffee pot. Cassie Burns was by the service window, stacking clean plates, and she turned when she heard the bell. She saw Vivian, and something moved across her young face. Not the stricken, frozen expression of the girl standing in the kitchen doorway, with a plate in her shaking hands. Not that girl at all. This was something newer. The quiet, certain look of a person who has recently learned something important about themselves and is still getting used to knowing it. She smiled. Then she went back to her plates. Vivian sat down in the window booth, the foretop, the one with the view of Clement Street and the courthouse clock visible down the block. And if she looked carefully, the third-floor window of the DA's office where her photograph now hung framed on the wall in the place it had always belonged. Denise set the coffee down without a word. Vivian wrapped both hands around the mug and let the warmth settle into her palms. She looked out the window at the ordinary Tuesday morning of a county that was not fixed. She knew that, had always known that, had never once been naive enough to believe that 2 indictments and a sheriff's resignation meant the work was finished. It wasn't finished. It was started. There was a difference, and the difference mattered enormously. But it was started. She opened the new file she had brought with her. Fresh pages, clean margins, a new set of cases waiting for the district attorney of Harlan County, Georgia, to decide what kind of attention they deserved. She thought about Hector Sims in his best suit, hands completely steady. She thought about Devin Fuller driving 4 hours back to a county he had spent 9 years avoiding because someone had finally called. She thought about her mother's kitchen and the porch light and the voice that said, "They are fighting the fact of you." She thought about a 19-year-old girl straightening her spine in a coffee shop and saying yes without being asked twice. She ordered 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. She turned to the first page of the new file. Outside, Harlan County moved through its Tuesday, unhurried, ordinary, paying attention in a way it hadn't before. The courthouse clock ticked down the block. The oak trees held their color against the October sky. Vivian Monroe picked up her pen. She had work to do. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.